So let me maybe just go back a step and ask the question, what's the function of the library in 2017? Because unless you understand the function of the library, you can't really understand how individuals, how students, how anybody is going to operate in this kind of environment. And I think it's clearly a shifting role. It's been shifting for probably 10 to 15 years now, maybe even longer. And we are still in the middle of this kind of major shift to a digital platform, albeit in some contexts, the library has shifted completely. So some parts of the world you will not see any longer what I would remember as, and we used to call the special library. In other words, within an institution, within an organization like this in UNESCO, those have increasingly been seeded, closed out in favor of a mixture of the web, of Google, but also things like the intranet and emerging disciplines like knowledge management and information management, which are actually some of the key drivers now in the library and information space. So we're seeing the kind of tradition of a librarian not necessarily disappearing, but becoming much more pervasive and in some ways much more challenging than was the case before. The digital aspect of that clearly of concern, but some of the traditional values or the traditional skills of librarians still remain. So things like collection management, trying to decide what are the key and critical resources that the users of your collections actually need. That applies in exactly the same way in a digital context. It's not just about taking everything there is. So you have to kind of deploy the same traditional techniques of evaluating resources, of assuring their value to the audience that you're dealing with, and so on. Similarly, traditional skills in terms of cataloging, indexing, as they used to be known, classification, they've mutated into metadata management, effectively ensuring that you're describing resources again in a way that maximizes their exposure through the digital systems, that maximizes the uptake and use by the audiences that you're dealing with, and that provide a kind of, I suppose, increasing problem. And one of the issues we've been talking about today at the conference is about how you standardize those approaches when you're dealing with content which is coming from a disparate mixture of sources. You're dealing with content and you're dealing with information with a multiplicity of formats coming from varying angles, conceivably with different languages behind them as well. A third point is about generic skills, and they are increasingly important in probably almost every occupation imaginable, but certainly in terms of the library and information business, they are absolutely key. And those mix together everything from great presentation skills, in other words, being able to influence and being able to advocate change, because that's fundamentally what we are involved in, through to a high degree, I guess, of technical skills. But digital librarians are not necessarily technologists. There are people who have that expertise and who have the ability to build systems, to analyze systems, and so on. What's required of digital librarians is to understand the ramifications of that technology and how to apply it, how to sell it, how to advocate it, how to bring about the potential changes that are needed in a cultural sense, as far as the audience that you're dealing with. Now, sometimes I think there's kind of a mismatch in terms of people who go into the library occupation and what actually needs to be done, what skills are required for this modern age, and that's something that we kind of have to begin to overcome over over a period, I guess. But it's no longer a business where you can kind of, as it were, hide yourself away in a corner. It's a matter of being very much up front and out front in terms of delivering the services that you need to deliver to show that you're adding value either to to the organisation that you're working for and to the users and consumers of your services. It's an understanding of the audience. The feel I have of NDL so far is that it's been very much driven by two things. It's been driven by the top level national concern, and that's quite legitimate. Governments have a strong role to play in this kind of domain. You can't kind of gainsay that in any way. But also it's been to some extent technologically driven, and that again tends to be the case with much that happens in the digital world. But the third element of that, of the equation, is about the audience. It is about who are you trying to deal with here, and what are the needs of that audience, and whether that's has kind of been explored in sufficient detail, I just don't know, but it is something that you clearly need to do at some point. So when you get to the stage where there is a sufficient level of usage, and you probably are at that point now, then you need to seriously start talking to those people, analysing what it is they are doing, what value they're getting out of the service they're accessing, and what more needs to be done. And by users, I don't mean the intermediate users, I mean the people who actually need this content and are deploying this content in the jobs that they are doing. And I think that's why I'm unclear at the moment. We've heard about international users of the NDL, and I guess different levels, different types of national users. The challenges of getting students involved in that as consumers and the executive. I want to know, what is it all those different stakeholders require? What are they expecting? And the extent to which you are meeting those kind of requirements. As to the technology, it's kind of very easy because technology keeps on changing very quickly. And it's very easy to be seduced by that, to constantly want to keep ahead of the technology. But you kind of have to decide whether what I'm trying to do is provide a service of value, or whether I'm providing a kind of test platform for new ideas. Both legitimate, but the one can get in the way of the other, or the one can end up being predominant. I think we've seen some of that in some of the presentations today, where my suspicion is that the platform really is more about testing out new ideas than it is providing an absolutely key service that people continue to use. Just give you an example. If you look at Google now and compare it to Google 5 years ago or 8 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, it's not changed much. And that's because it seriously is used. If you're constantly having to amend or change your product, then probably there's something wrong with your product. People don't want it. So that's maybe piece of advice 2. Piece of advice 3, well, you're probably doing it now. And that's about advocacy, it's about marketing, it's about getting your service, your project and your product known amongst the people who need to know about it. That may be the Vice Chancellors and the Chief Executives, but it also might be about creating a buzz amongst students, or a buzz amongst certain groups of academics or a certain discipline, rather than just trying to push it out to the whole of the country and wait for people to come and use it. So a clear, focused, hard marketing strategy, properly segmented. And that's it's probably easier to say it is to be done, but you really need to be ensuring that it's embedded within the educational structure. I know there are a lot of hits. I've heard a lot of figures from some of the other national services in terms of the analytics, and that's something also maybe that you need to dig a bit deeper into. You know, who are these people? I think I've made that point already. But web analytics give you enormous opportunities to refine what you're doing and to direct it to best effect.